In the Navajo culture, the creature known as the Skinwalker is said to be an evil being that possesses the ability to transform themselves into various animal forms. This is only one of several types of Navajo witches, but is considered the most evil and dangerous. It is said that to become a Skinwalker, one must kill a close family member or loved one. After they have killed this family member or loved one, they must wear the skins of the animal that they intend to take the form of. Because of this, it is taboo in Navajo culture to wear the pelts of any predatory animal. Skinwalkers are also said to have the ability to take possession of another person if that person locks eyes with them. Once possessed, the Skinwalker can make the victim do or say things that they wouldn't otherwise do. Many of the reported encounters with Skinwalkers involve unnatural animals running alongside of vehicles, uncannily matching the speed of the vehicle for some time before running off into the wilderness. One of the more well-traveled Skinwalker stories involves a man who was making repairs to his home. He began hearing laughter coming from his nearby sheep pens. When he went to investigate, he found all of his sheep huddled into one corner of the pen, obviously terrified. He looked over to notice a lone ram separate from the group. The ram stood up on its hind legs and began to laugh in a human-like manner, after which it casually walked off into the distance. A couple of short stories were relayed to me by a coworker some years ago in Arizona. This woman grew up on a reservation and lived there for most of her life, and in the first encounter she experienced, she and a bunch of her friends were having a party out in a remote area a few miles removed from any housing or structures. They were drinking, listening to music, and doing the normal things that rebellious teenagers are wont to do. Suddenly, one of them heard something off in the desert and alerted the others. They turned the music down and could hear something walking around in the darkness. They all jumped in the pickup truck and blasted out of there, and the whole time the people in the back of the truck were screaming that this thing was following them and keeping up with them all the way back into town. The second story that she relayed to me was one that she wasn't sure was a Skinwalker story, but is eerie nonetheless, so I'll include it here. In high school, she was an accomplished cross-country runner and would practice along the desert roads in the mornings. One time while she was out running, she took a different road than usual and ended up running in an area that she wasn't really familiar with. Some miles into her trek, a rattlesnake came alongside her and tried to strike her. It was then that she noticed rattlesnakes all along the road ahead of her, at which point she quickly reversed course and began sprinting back towards her house, terrified. In another well-traveled story, a family were driving home at night through the Navajo reservation. As they came around a sharp curve, something dark and hairy jumped out from the ditch in front of them. It was wearing a shirt and pants, but could not be identified. Days after this strange encounter, at their Flagstaff, Arizona home, the family was awakened to hear drumming and chanting outside of their house. When they looked out, they saw 3 dark forms outside of their fence. The creatures were seemingly unable to come closer than their fence line and eventually departed. In a story relayed from a gentleman out of Cameron, Arizona, it was said that a woman lived up in the mesas west of town, and everyone knew that she was a Skinwalker. His mother had always warned him to stay away from the woman and to run away if he ever came across her. One day, while out hiking with some of his friends, one of them pointed up to a cliff where they saw the woman standing right at the edge. He estimated it to be at least 100 feet high from the ground. They watched her as she stared over the cliff into the desert for indeterminate length of time. Then she suddenly stepped off of the cliff and floated gently to the bottom, where they lost sight of her. Obviously, they were at that point terrified and hightailed it back home. Another gentleman from Arizona recalled a strange and terrifying encounter that he had while at his father's house. On their property, they had an old dwelling off to the side that used to be their original home. He recalled that on this day he was on a hill overlooking the property when he saw a short, hairy creature walking around one side of their old dwelling. It appeared to him to be sneaking as if it were possibly hunting. It was then that he noticed his sister was coming around the other side of the dwelling on an apparent collision course with this creature. He screamed and yelled to her, attempting to warn her of the strange creature, at which point she looked up and waved, thinking he was greeting her. The creature also seemed to hear him, though, and responded by pressing its back up against the wall of the dwelling and seemingly melding into the wood of the old home. Terrified, the man began running down the hill while yelling at his sister to run. At this point, he saw the creature pull itself back off the wall and run down into a ditch on the property faster than anything he had ever seen. The family, after being notified by him, subsequently called the medicine man to the property to perform a cleansing. The Skinwalker is undoubtedly one of the more frightening concepts in American folklore. If you're ever visiting the Four Corners area in the western United States, try not to think too deeply on the subject, as it is said that dwelling on the Skinwalker or speaking about them is a good way to manifest an encounter with this terrifying creature. Thank you for joining me on this cursory exploration of the Skinwalker, and please join me again as I continue to explore the unknown.